Hello everybody and welcome back to another brainstorm. So today we're going to be talking about the blood. I'm going to talk about this in two different sections. So first of all, we're going to mention what the different components are of the blood, so what different things make up our blood, and then we'll talk about their individual functions and roles in the body. So let's get into it. Alright guys, so our blood is made up of four main components: the plasma, the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. Don't worry too much about that, we're going to come on to them individually in more detail in a second. But one key fact here is the different percentages of the blood that are made up by these components. So you'll see in this diagram here that the plasma makes up 55% of the blood, the red blood cells make up 45%, and the white blood cells and the platelets make up the less than 1% of the blood. Alright guys, so the first component of the blood, and probably the most important, is the plasma. So the plasma is a yellow liquid that forms the base of the blood, and without this, the blood would just be a bunch of cells floating around in the body. So it's the plasma that holds it all together. So the plasma is responsible for carrying the blood cells around the body and other substances too. So by other substances, we've got three examples here. So first of all, it carries carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of respiration. So you'll know that our body cells take up oxygen and they make energy from it alongside glucose. And as a product of this reaction, we have carbon dioxide as the waste product. So the plasma in the blood takes up carbon dioxide via diffusion from the cells, and it transports these to the lungs so they can remove this waste product through gas exchange. Secondly, plasma carries urea. Now, urea is formed in the liver when the liver breaks down our excess proteins in the body, which we simply cannot store. The plasma takes up the urea and transports it to the kidneys so it can be excreted from the body in the form of urine. And finally, the plasma carries small soluble products of digestion. So you'll know that through digestion, our body takes large food molecules and breaks them down into small soluble molecules that can be absorbed into the bloodstream. And the plasma will take these molecules and take them to the various cells where they might be used. Examples of these could be chains of amino acids, fatty acids, glycerols, and also glucose, most importantly used in respiration. The plasma carries a couple of other substances such as hormones and enzymes, but those are less abundant. So you'll see in this picture here, we've got a picture of, on the right, this is the blood as we'd see in the body. We can't actually tell the different substances in it. But on the left, you'll see the blood has been split into its different substances, and this top yellow layer is our plasma. The way this is done is the blood is spun around really fast in a machine known as a centrifuge. Okay guys, so the second component of the blood, and probably the component that you've heard of before, is these red blood cells. The function of these red blood cells is to bind to and transport oxygen around the body, and to do this very efficiently, they have a couple of adaptations which we're going to mention. So first of all, our red blood cells have a biconcave disc. What do we mean by this? So you'll see in this picture here, and I'll just draw it here as well, our red blood cells have these two dimples here, and this is to increase the surface area for oxygen to diffuse into the red blood cell, and therefore increases the efficiency of diffusion. Secondly, these red blood cells are packed full of this iron-based molecule known as hemoglobin. Now, through a reversible reaction, oxygen and hemoglobin bind to form oxyhemoglobin. So this reaction will probably occur in the capillaries next to the alveolus, where most of our gas exchange takes place, and this oxyhemoglobin molecule can be transported around the body, and because this is a reversible reaction, our oxyhemoglobin can convert back into oxygen and hemoglobin. When it reaches the cells, the oxygen here will diffuse into the cells to be used in reactions such as respiration, and this hemoglobin will stay inside of the red blood cells to be reused and to bind to more oxygen. And finally, this is a bit of a strange adaptation, but the red blood cells do not have a nucleus, unlike many other cells. So we assume that most of our cells have a nucleus that controls the activity, but the only reason that red blood cells don't have a nucleus is so that they can pack more and more hemoglobin into them. So our next component of the blood is the white blood cells, and these play a crucial part in the body as they work as part of the immune system and they fight against harmful microorganisms. So this could be bacteria and viruses in the body. And you'll notice from this picture as well that these white blood cells are not only larger than the red blood cells, but there's not as many of them, so they're in lower abundance, okay? So the two types of white blood cells that we learn about in GCSE are lymphocytes and phagocytes, okay? And they both have individual roles. So our lymphocytes produce chemicals known as antitoxins, okay? What these antitoxins do is that our harmful microorganisms here produce these chemicals known as toxins, and these toxins in the body are what make us feel ill when we might have a virus or a bacterial infection. But lymphocytes produce antitoxins which neutralize these toxins and make us feel less ill, essentially. And lymphocytes also produce antibodies. Now what antibodies do is they bind to these protein markers on the outside of the microorganism. They're called antigens, and they bind and destroy these microorganisms in that way. Now phagocytes are a little bit different. What phagocytes do is they engulf and digest microorganisms. So they don't produce these antibodies or antitoxins. These guys just wrap themselves around the microorganism and digest it to get rid of it. And this is a process known as phagocytosis. Alright guys, so the final component of the blood that we're going to mention today are the platelets. Now platelets are very, very important. They're only tiny fragments of cells, okay? But what they do is in the blood they aid in clotting it. And this happens through an enzyme-controlled reaction with a molecule known as fibrinogen. With the enzyme-controlled reaction, what happens is this fibrinogen becomes this fibrin mesh, which you'll see in this picture here. And what this mesh does is it traps platelets and red blood cells, which in turn clots the blood. So you'll see that our red blood cells here and our platelets right here have all been trapped inside of this spiderweb-like mesh. And by clotting the blood in this way, we do three main things. It protects the new skin as the new skin forms. So you can imagine that if we get cut, our body has to repair itself, and this provides quite a lot of protection whilst that's happening. It prevents the entry of microorganisms. So you can imagine that when we get cut, this opens a really big hole in the skin which bacteria and viruses can enter. And by clotting the blood, it means that we seal off this hole in the skin and it reduces the risk of infection. And finally, probably the most obvious thing that clotting the blood does is that it reduces excess blood loss. So you can imagine if we've got a cut, the reason that all of our blood doesn't leave through that cut is because our blood will clot, which stops excess blood loss, which could have very, very harmful effects on us. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you guys all for watching. Please make sure you hit like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I'll see you guys soon.